You know that moment when your entire world shifts and suddenly you're seeing everything with crystal clarity? When the rose-coloured glasses shatter so completely that you can't even remember why you wore them in the first place. Mine happened in a sterile hospital room at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, with my arms still throbbing from where they'd drawn what felt like half my blood supply. Let me paint you the picture of the most devastating wake-up call of my life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects, casting that sickly green glow that only hospitals seem to master. My boyfriend, Michael, lay there, machines beeping around him like a twisted symphony, and I sat beside his bed, feeling like a hero, like someone who'd just saved the day. The doctors had called me their miracle. Apparently, Michael and I shared AB negative blood, one of the rarest types. When they couldn't find enough in their blood bank, I didn't hesitate. I rolled up my sleeve and told them to take whatever he needed. "Take it all, if you have to," I remember saying. "Just save him." And they did save him. We saved him. My blood was literally keeping him alive, flowing through his veins, giving him a second chance at life. I should have been the first person he wanted to see when those gorgeous brown eyes finally fluttered open. I should have been his angel, his saviour, the woman who proved just how much she loved him. Instead, those eyes that I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago searched frantically around the room, past me, through me, as if I was invisible, as if I was nothing more than another piece of hospital furniture. "Where's Jenny?" he whispered, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Is Jenny okay?" Jenny. His ex-girlfriend's name hit me like a physical slap. Here I was, still lightheaded from blood loss, having just saved his life, and the first word out of his mouth was another woman's name. "Michael, it's me, Melissa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was shattering into microscopic pieces. "Jenny left the hospital hours ago. She's fine, just a few scratches, but she left. You want to know what broke me?" It wasn't anger that flashed across his face when I said Jenny had left. It was devastation. Pure, raw devastation, as if I'd just told him his entire world had ended. His face crumpled like a piece of paper being thrown away, and I realised with growing horror that he wasn't relieved I was there. He wasn't grateful that I'd saved his life. He was heartbroken that she wasn't. "You don't understand," he rasped, trying to sit up despite the machines and tubes. "I was supposed to protect her. I failed her. I always fail her." "Failed her? Failed her?" I wanted to scream. The only person who had failed anyone was him, failing to see the woman who had just bled for him. Literally. Failing to appreciate the girlfriend who had spent the last 6 hours pacing hospital corridors, signing consent forms, and watching doctors pump bag after bag of my blood into his ungrateful body. But I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice, because that's who I was then. Melissa, the peacekeeper. Melissa, the understanding girlfriend. Melissa, the doormat. Instead, I squeezed his hand gently and said, "You didn't fail anyone, Michael. You were in an accident. It wasn't your fault." He pulled his hand away from mine like my touch burned him. Actually pulled away from the woman who had just given him life itself. "I need to find Jenny," he said, his eyes wild with panic. "I need to call her. I need to make things right with her. She must be so scared, so alone. I have to fix this." That's when it happened. That's when something inside me didn't just break. It transformed. Like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, except instead of something beautiful, what emerged was cold, calculating clarity. I looked at this man I'd loved for 3 years, this man whose life I'd just saved, and I realised I'd been loving a ghost, a projection, a fantasy. The real Michael was lying right there in front of me, and he was telling me exactly who he was and what I meant to him. Nothing. I meant absolutely nothing to him. Michael, I said quietly, Jenny left you after the accident. She didn't even stay to make sure you were okay. I'm the one who's been here all night. I'm the one who gave you my blood. That's different, he said dismissively. You're my girlfriend. You're supposed to be here. But Jenny needed me and I let her down. Again. Supposed to be here. Like it was my job. Like it was an obligation rather than an act of love. Like bleeding for him was just another item on my girlfriend duty checklist, somewhere between picking up his dry cleaning and remembering his mother's birthday. I stood up slowly, my legs still weak from the blood loss, and walked to the window. The city looked different at this hour. Quieter, more honest somehow. All the pretense of the day had been stripped away, leaving only the raw truth of who people really were when they thought no one was watching. You know what's funny, Michael? I said, not turning around. I used to think we were soulmates. I used to believe that finding someone with the same rare blood type was the universe telling us we were meant to be together, like we were literally made for each other. I heard him shift in the bed behind me, probably confused by my sudden calmness. But I realize now that sharing the same blood type doesn't mean we're compatible. It just means I'm useful to you. It means when you need something I have, I'm the perfect donor, not the perfect partner. The perfect donor. Melissa, you're being dramatic. I almost died tonight. Can't you understand that I need to know Jenny's okay? She was in the car with me. I was driving. If something had happened to her. I turned around then, and I know he must have seen something different in my eyes, because his voice trailed off mid-sentence. If something had happened to her, what, Michael? You would have felt guilty. You would have blamed yourself. Well, guess what? Something did happen tonight. You almost died, and I saved you. But instead of feeling grateful, instead of realizing that maybe, just maybe, the woman who literally bled for you might be worth your attention, you're lying there pining for the woman who walked away. The machines around his bed continued their steady beeping, marking time like a countdown to the end of something. And maybe they were. I've been thinking, I continued, my voice eerily calm, about all the times over the past 3 years when you've made me feel like second choice. All the times you've compared me to her, found me lacking, made me feel like I was just keeping your bed warm until she decided she wanted you back. That's not true, and you know it. Isn't it? Then tell me, Michael, right now, in this moment, when you almost died and I saved your life, who are you thinking about? Who are you worried about? Who do you want to see? The silence stretched between us like a canyon. I could see the answer in his eyes, even though he was too much of a coward to say it out loud. I thought so, I whispered. I walked back to his bedside and picked up my purse, checking to make sure I had everything. My phone, my keys, my dignity, well, what was left of it. Where are you going? He asked, panic finally creeping into his voice. But it wasn't panic at the thought of losing me. It was panic at the thought of being alone, of not having his reliable backup plan sitting by his bedside. I'm going home, I said simply. I'm tired, and I've lost a lot of blood tonight. I need to rest. But visiting hours aren't over. You don't have to leave yet. I stared at him for a long moment, memorizing his face. The face I'd kissed goodbye just hours earlier when he'd stormed out after another fight. The same fight we'd been having for months. About Jenny, about his inability to let go of the past, about my growing suspicion that I was nothing more than a consolation prize. You're right, I said softly. I don't have to leave yet. But I want to. Because for the first time in 3 years, I'm seeing clearly. And what I see is a man who would rather pine for a woman who abandoned him than appreciate the woman who saved him. I leaned down and kissed his forehead gently, tasting the salt of tears I didn't even realize I'd been crying. Get some rest, Michael. And when you're feeling better, maybe spend some time thinking about what it really means when someone loves you enough to bleed for you. Because that's a gift that not everyone gets, and it's definitely not a gift that everyone deserves. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway of my own personal hell. "Melissa, wait," he called after me. "I do appreciate what you did tonight. I do. I need to know she's okay. Can't you understand that?" I paused at the doorway without turning around. "What I understand, Michael, is that you'll never love me the way you love her. What I understand is that I just gave you a piece of my soul, along with my blood, and you couldn't care less. What I understand is that I've been living in a fantasy, believing that being the woman you settled for was the same as being the woman you chose." I finally turned back to look at him one last time. "But here's what you need to understand. That woman you're so worried about, that woman you think needs your protection, she's not the victim in tonight's story, Michael. She's not the one who needs saving. And someday, when you finally see the truth about who Jenny really is and what she's really capable of, you're going to remember this moment. You're going to remember the woman who bled for you, who saved your life, who loved you enough to give you everything she had, and you're going to realize that you threw it all away for a ghost." As I walked down that hospital corridor, my heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown, I had no idea how prophetic those words would turn out to be. I had no idea that I was about to discover just how right I was about Jenny, or how wrong I'd been about everything else. All I knew was that the woman who had walked into that hospital room was gone forever. In her place was someone new, someone harder, someone who had learned the most valuable lesson of her life. Sometimes saving someone's life isn't about keeping them alive. Sometimes it's about learning when to let them go. 3 days. That's how long it took for Michael to come crawling back with his tail between his legs, armed with grocery store flowers and what he probably thought was a heartfelt apology. I was sitting on my couch, still recovering from the blood loss, when I heard his key in the lock, a key I should have demanded back the moment I walked out of that hospital. "Mel, baby, I'm sorry. I was confused, I was on pain medication, I wasn't thinking straight," he called out as he stumbled through my apartment like he owned the place. I didn't even look up from my book. "The medication didn't make you call out another woman's name, Michael. That came from somewhere much deeper." He dropped those pathetic flowers on my coffee table and sank down beside me, wincing dramatically from his injuries. Always the performer, always looking for sympathy. "I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital. You're right. I should have thanked you first. I should have seen you first. I'm grateful, Mel. I really am." "Are you?" I asked, finally meeting his eyes. "Or are you just scared of being alone while you recover?" The flicker of panic that crossed his face told me everything I needed to know. But what he said next, that's what sealed his fate. "Jenny came to see me yesterday," he admitted, and I watched him carefully for any sign of guilt or shame. There was none. "She feels terrible about leaving the hospital that night. She was just in shock, you know? She wanted to make sure I was okay." Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. How thoughtful of her. I'm sure she was very concerned. She was crying, Mel. She kept saying it was all her fault, that she should have made me stay home that night, instead of letting me drive off angry. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. I needed to hear every word. She looked so broken, so guilty, I had to comfort her. Of course he did. St. Michael, always ready to comfort his precious Jenny, while the woman who'd literally saved his life sat at home recovering from blood loss. "Tell me about the accident," I said carefully. I never got the full story. The police report was pretty basic. Michael's face darkened, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, maybe? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. It's all a blur, honestly. We had that fight, you remember, about her showing up at our apartment uninvited again? I was angry, so I went for a drive to cool off. Jenny followed me, said she wanted to talk. We ended up at that overlook on Canyon Road. You know the one? I knew it. It was where Michael and I had our first kiss, actually. How romantic that he'd taken his ex-girlfriend to our special place. We were talking in the car, and then... He shook his head, running his hands through his hair. The brakes just failed. Complete mechanical failure. We went straight through the guardrail and down the embankment. If that tree hadn't stopped us... He shuddered convincingly. How terrifying, I murmured. And Jenny was completely fine? Just scratches? She's tougher than she looks, he said with something that might have been admiration. Always has been. She managed to climb out of the car and get help. Probably saved both our lives. Funny thing about lies, they have a way of revealing themselves if you know what to look for. And I was starting to see cracks in Michael's story that I'd never noticed before. Well, I said, standing up and smoothing down my dress, I should probably go see her. Thank her for getting help so quickly. After all, if she hadn't acted so fast, I might not have had a boyfriend to save with my blood. The colour drained from Michael's face. That's not necessary, Mel. Jenny's still pretty shaken up. She doesn't want visitors right now. Oh, but I insist. Woman to woman, you know? I think we should clear the air about a few things. Michael grabbed my wrist, not gently. Melissa, leave it alone. Some things are better left in the past. I stared down at his hand gripping my wrist, at the desperation in his eyes, and I realised that Michael wasn't just protecting Jenny from me. He was protecting her from the truth. The question was, what truth? I pulled my wrist free and smiled sweetly. Of course, darling, whatever you think is best. But as soon as Michael left that evening, claiming he needed to rest at his own place, I did exactly what any woman with half a brain would do. I drove straight to Jenny Morrison's apartment. Jenny lived in one of those trendy downtown lofts that cost more per month than most people made in a year. Old money, new attitude, and the kind of beauty that made other women feel like they were playing a different sport entirely. I'd only met her a handful of times, but each encounter had left me feeling like I was somehow lacking, somehow less than. She answered the door in silk pyjamas that probably cost more than my car payment, her blonde hair perfectly tousled, her skin glowing with that expensive kind of health that comes from personal trainers and dermatologists. For someone who just survived a horrific car accident, she looked remarkably unscathed. Melissa, she said, and I caught the flicker of something in her green eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? Fear? This is unexpected. I hope you don't mind me dropping by unannounced. I wanted to thank you for saving Michael's life. She stepped aside to let me in, and I noticed she moved with the fluid grace of someone who definitely wasn't dealing with any lingering injuries from a car crash. I only did what anyone would do, she said modestly, leading me to her pristine living room. Everything was white and chrome and sharp edges, much like Jenny herself. Still, I insisted, settling into her expensive couch. Climbing out of a wrecked car and getting help, that takes real courage, especially when you are probably in shock yourself. Jenny poured herself a glass of wine. Interesting choice for someone supposedly traumatized, and didn't offer me one. It all happened so fast. Adrenaline, you know? Of course, though I have to say, you look remarkably well for someone who went through such an ordeal. Michael said you had scratches, but I don't see any... Her hand went instinctively to her face, and I saw her calculate her response. Good concealer, she said finally, and they were mostly on my arms and legs. How fortunate that they didn't scar that beautiful face of yours. I leaned forward conspiratorially. Can I ask you something woman to woman? Jenny's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course. What were you and Michael really doing at Canyon Road that night? I mean, it seems like an odd place to have a serious conversation, especially after following him there uninvited. The wineglass paused halfway to her lips. I was trying to apologise for showing up at your apartment, for causing problems in your relationship. I wanted to make things right. How noble of you. I stood up and walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows, admiring the view of the city below. You know, it's funny. I've been thinking about that accident a lot over the past few days, trying to understand how brake failure could happen so suddenly, so completely. These things happen, Jenny said carefully. Cars are machines. Machines break down. I turned back to face her, and I let her see something new in my eyes. Something that made her sit up straighter, made her grip that wine glass a little tighter. You're absolutely right. Machines do break down. But usually there are warning signs, don't you think? Soft brakes, strange noises, a pedal that feels different. Michael's car was serviced just 2 weeks ago. Clean bill of health. Jenny set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. What exactly are you implying, Melissa? I'm not implying anything. I am simply observing that it's quite a coincidence. Michael's ex-girlfriend shows up at our apartment uninvited, causes a fight, follows him when he leaves, and then miraculously survives a car accident that nearly kills him while emerging virtually unscathed herself. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. When Jenny finally spoke, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. You have quite an imagination. Do I? Or do I just have eyes? I walked back over to where she sat, moving slowly, deliberately. You see, Jenny, I've spent 3 years watching Michael pine for you. 3 years feeling like I was competing with a ghost, a perfect memory he couldn't let go of. But sitting here now, looking at you, I'm starting to wonder if maybe you never really went away at all. Jenny stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking. I think you should leave. Oh, I'm not done yet. I remained seated, calm as still water. I'm curious about something else. Michael said you felt guilty about the accident, that you were crying and broken up about it. But you don't look guilty to me, Jenny. You look calculating. Get out! Her voice was sharp now, dangerous. You know what I think happened that night? I continued as if she hadn't spoken. I think you didn't follow Michael to apologise. I think you followed him to make sure he couldn't choose me over you ever again. I think you got into that car with a plan, and the only thing that went wrong was that he survived it. Jenny's face had gone pale, but her eyes were blazing with something that looked an awful lot like rage and guilt. You're delusional, she hissed. You're so desperate to find someone to blame for Michael not loving you that you're making up elaborate conspiracy theories. I smiled then, and it was the kind of smile that had teeth. Maybe I am delusional. Maybe I'm just a heartbroken woman looking for someone to blame. But here's the thing about being delusional, Jenny. Sometimes it makes you see patterns that other people miss. Sometimes it makes you pay attention to details that everyone else overlooks. I stood up finally, smoothing down my skirt, preparing to leave. But first, I had one more gift to give her. Like security cameras, for instance. You'd be amazed how many parking garages have them these days, or how many mechanics keep detailed records of their work, or how easy it is to retrieve deleted text messages if you know the right people. The look that crossed Jenny's face in that moment was pure, undiluted terror, and that's when I knew with absolute certainty that every suspicion I'd harboured, every dark thought I'd pushed away as paranoia was true. Jenny Morrison hadn't just failed to save Michael that night. She had tried to kill him, and as I walked toward her door, leaving her standing there in her perfect white living room, with her perfect white lies crumbling around her, I realised that the woman who had walked into that hospital room 3 days ago wasn't the only one who had died that night. The old Melissa, the one who made excuses for people, who gave everyone the benefit of the doubt, who believed that love conquered all, she was gone forever. In her place was someone new, someone who understood that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who looked like prey. Someone who knew that the sweetest revenge wasn't served cold. It was served with a smile and a plan that would take time to unfold. And I had all the time in the world. You know what's funny about people who think they're untouchable? They get sloppy, they leave trails, and if you're patient enough, smart enough, and angry enough, you can follow those trails right back to their perfectly manicured doorstep and watch their entire world crumble. The morning after my little visit with Jenny, I woke up with a clarity I'd never experienced before. It was like someone had adjusted the focus on my entire life, and suddenly I could see all the details I'd been missing. Michael was still sleeping beside me. He'd wormed his way back into my bed, with promises of change and gratitude that lasted exactly as long as it took him to get comfortable again. I slipped out quietly and made coffee, my mind already working through the pieces of this puzzle. Jenny's terrified face when I mentioned security cameras. Her perfect appearance despite supposedly surviving a car crash. Michael's desperation to keep us apart. The convenient brake failure on a recently serviced car. But suspicion wasn't enough. If I was going to destroy the woman who tried to murder the man I loved, and the man who'd chosen her over me even after I'd saved his life, I needed proof. Real, undeniable, courtroom quality evidence. I started with the mechanic. Tony's auto repair was the kind of place that smelled like motor oil and broken dreams, tucked between a dry cleaner and a check cashing store in the older part of town. Michael had been taking his car there for years because Tony was cheap and didn't ask questions. What Michael didn't know was that Tony was also paranoid about lawsuits and documented everything. "Insurance company giving you trouble?" Tony asked when I explained why I needed Michael's service records. He was a small man with permanently stained fingers and the kind of sharp eyes that came from years of dealing with people trying to scam him. "Something like that," I said, sliding a $100 bill across his greasy counter. "I just need to know exactly what work was done and when." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car reading through Michael's complete service history, and my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Because right there in black and white was proof that Michael's brakes had been inspected, tested, and certified perfect just 10 days before the accident. But even more interesting was what Tony told me as he walked me to my car. "Funny thing about that brake failure," he said, lighting a cigarette. "In 30 years of doing this, I have never seen a complete hydraulic failure like that on a car that new, that well maintained. Usually, brake lines don't just fail. They get damaged by something. Road debris, corrosion, or..." He gave me a meaningful look. "Other things." "Other things?" "Lady, I've seen every kind of insurance fraud there is. Cars that mysteriously catch fire after the owner misses a few payments. Accidents that happen right after someone takes out a big life insurance policy. Brake lines that get cut just enough to fail at exactly the wrong moment." He took a long drag of his cigarette. "I'm not saying that's what happened to your boyfriend's car. I'm just saying that when the cops brought it in, I noticed some interesting marks on those brake lines." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "What kind of marks?" "The kind that look like they might have been made by a very sharp knife, or maybe a scalpel, something precise, surgical, someone who knew exactly where to cut to make it look like natural failure." He flicked his cigarette into the street. "But hey, what do I know? I'm just a mechanic." As I drove away from Tony's shop, I felt like I was floating. Jenny hadn't just sabotaged Michael's car, she'd done it with surgical precision, planning it perfectly to look like an accident. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was premeditated attempted murder. But I needed more than a mechanic's observations. I needed to know how she'd accessed Michael's car, when she had done it, and most importantly, I needed proof of her motive that went beyond just wanting him back. That's when I remembered something that had been nagging at me since my visit to Jenny's apartment. Her phone. I'd noticed it sitting on her kitchen counter. The screen cracked from what she'd probably claimed was damage from the accident. But phones don't just get forgotten in the hospital waiting rooms. They get left behind when someone is in too much of a hurry to think straight. It took me 3 days of following Jenny's routine to find my opportunity. 3 days of watching her yoga classes, her lunch dates, her shopping trips. 3 days of learning that despite her claims of being traumatized by the accident, Jenny Morrison was living her life without a care in the world. My chance came when she left her phone unattended during a massage appointment at an exclusive spa downtown. While she was getting her post-attempted murder relaxation treatment, I had exactly 90 minutes to work with what she'd left behind. Thank God for ex-boyfriends who work in IT and still owe you favours. This is highly illegal, you know, Marcus said as his fingers flew over his laptop, connected to Jenny's phone through cables that looked like something from a spy movie. If you get caught with this information... I won't get caught, I assured him. And Marcus, after what I'm about to show you, you're going to understand why this is necessary. What we found in Jenny's phone made my blood run cold. Text messages dating back months, all to numbers I didn't recognise, but that Marcus's software quickly identified as burner phones. Messages that read like a step-by-step guide to stalking. He left work at 6:15 today. Same route home as always. The girlfriend is definitely a problem. She's making him comfortable, complacent. Need to change that. Found the perfect mechanic. Cash only, no questions asked. Meeting tomorrow. But the messages that made my hand shake were the ones from the week before the accident. He won't leave her willingly. Too guilty, too comfortable. Need a more permanent solution. Brake failure looks accidental. Need to make sure I'm in the car when it happens for authenticity. If this doesn't work, backup plan involves framing the girlfriend. Anonymous tip about her being unstable, jealous, motive established. And the final message sent just hours before the accident. Tonight's the night. One way or another, Michael won't be with her anymore after this. If I can't have him, no one can. Jesus Christ, Marcus whispered, reading over my shoulder. This woman is completely psychotic. Keep digging, I said, my voice eerily calm. I want everything. Bank records, call logs, location data, everything. What we found next was even worse. Bank transfers to the mechanic who'd helped her sabotage the car. GPS data showing her following Michael's movements for weeks before the accident. And, most damning of all, insurance policies. Jenny had taken out a life insurance policy on Michael just 2 months before the accident. Not a small one either. $500,000, with her listed as the sole beneficiary. The kind of policy that raised red flags with investigators when the insured person died in suspicious circumstances. But she'd been smart about it, or thought she had been. The policy was purchased through a company she had connections with, buried in paperwork that made it look like a routine business insurance policy. If Michael had died in that accident, it would have taken investigators months to discover the connection, and by then, Jenny would have been playing the grieving ex-girlfriend, collecting her payout, and probably planning her next move. How did she even get him to sign this? Marcus asked, scrolling through the policy documents. I studied the signature and my blood turned to ice, because I recognised the handwriting in the margins, the small corrections and notes. I'd seen Michael's signature 1,000 times, but I'd also seen him sign documents while distracted, while watching TV, while I was sitting right next to him asking him what he was signing. She brought it to him at home, I realised. Probably told him it was something else entirely. Michael signs everything without reading it. Lease agreements, insurance forms, credit card applications. She could have told him it was anything and he would have signed it. As Marcus transferred everything to encrypted drives, I sat back and marvelled at the scope of Jenny's plan. This wasn't just about getting Michael back. This was about eliminating me as competition and collecting a fortune in the process. If the accident had gone according to her plan, Michael would be dead. Thus, I would be the grieving girlfriend who'd never even know about the insurance policy, and Jenny would be set for life. But there was one more piece of the puzzle I needed, and it was the most dangerous one to obtain. Security footage. The parking garage where Michael kept his car was one of those older downtown structures with minimal lighting and cameras that looked more decorative than functional. But appearances can be deceiving, and I'd learned never to underestimate what technology could capture. It took another favour, this time from a friend who worked building security, and a substantial bribe to the night security guard. But eventually I found myself sitting in a cramped security office, watching grainy black and white footage from the week before the accident. And there she was. At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night, Jenny Morrison's distinctive BMW pulled into the garage. The footage was clear enough to show her getting out of her car, looking around to make sure she was alone, and then walking purposefully toward Michael's parking spot, with what looked like a small bag in her hand. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to show her crouched beside Michael's car for nearly 20 minutes, working on something near the front wheel. Good enough to show her standing up, wiping her hands on a cloth, and throwing something small into a nearby dumpster. Good enough to show her walking back to her car with the confident stride of someone who just signed Michael's death warrant. "Can you make copies of this?" I asked the security guard, who was already nodding. "Lady, I don't know what that blonde did to you, but anyone who creeps around parking garages at 3 a.m. cutting brake lines deserves whatever's coming to them." As I drove home that night with my evidence safely stored in multiple locations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete and total control. Jenny Morrison thought she was the spider in this web, but she was about to discover that there was another predator in her perfect little world, one who'd been watching, learning, and preparing. Michael was still asleep when I got home, snoring softly in the bed we'd shared for 3 years. The bed where he'd held me, promised me forever, and then casually mentioned his ex-girlfriend's name while I was recovering from saving his ungrateful life. I stood in the doorway watching him sleep, and I realised that everything I'd discovered wasn't just about Jenny anymore. It was about Michael too. Because a man who could be manipulated into signing insurance policies was the same man who could be manipulated into believing his devoted girlfriend was unstable and jealous. The same man who would have let me be framed for his murder while mourning the woman who'd actually killed him. Tomorrow I would begin the final phase of my plan. Tomorrow I would start returning every betrayal, every dismissal, every moment of being treated as less than I was worth. But tonight, I was going to sleep peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that I held the power to destroy 2 people who'd underestimated the woman they'd written off as weak. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting everything. 6 months. That's how long I waited after gathering all my evidence. 6 months of playing the perfect girlfriend while I planned the most beautiful destruction you've ever witnessed. 6 months of watching Michael continue to pine for the woman who tried to murder him, while I smiled and nodded and counted down the days until I could watch his entire world burn. During those months, I did something that surprised even me. I got stronger. Physically, emotionally, financially. I started working out, not because I wanted to look better for Michael, but because I wanted to feel powerful. I took on extra projects at work, saved every penny I could, and quietly started building a life that didn't revolve around a man who saw me as a convenience rather than a choice. And I watched. God, how I watched. I watched Michael continue to text Jenny daily, always under the guise of checking on her recovery. I watched him lie to me about working late when he was actually meeting her for coffee, for lunch, for long walks where they could process their trauma together. I watched him treat me like his nursemaid while he healed from injuries that his precious Jenny had caused. Most importantly, I watched Jenny get comfortable. She'd stopped being careful, stopped looking over her shoulder. She'd gotten away with attempted murder, collected her insurance payout through a web of shell companies I'd traced, and was now playing the long game of winning Michael back completely. What she didn't know was that I was playing a longer game. The setup was simple, really. Sometimes the most devastating traps are the ones that spring themselves. I planned Michael's surprise birthday party for a Saturday evening in March. Small gathering, I told him, just close friends, nothing fancy. He was so touched by the gesture, so grateful that I was finally acting normal again, after months of what he called my weird moods. If only he knew. I invited 12 people total. Michael's best friend, Jake, and his wife, his colleague Sarah from work, his brother Tom, a few other friends who'd known him for years, people who respected him, who thought he was a good man, who would be absolutely shattered to learn the truth about what kind of person he really was. And of course, I invited Jenny. I think it's time we moved past all the awkwardness, I told Michael when I mentioned her invitation. We're all adults here. What happened was an accident, and we should all be grateful that you both survived. Michael's face lit up like Christmas morning. Finally, his two favourite women were going to play nice together. Finally, he could have his cake and eat it too. The party was perfect. I'd spent weeks planning every detail, from the catered food to the playlist to the seating arrangement that would put Jenny directly across from Michael, where he could stare at her all night while I played the gracious hostess. Everyone arrived on time except Jenny, who made her entrance 20 minutes late in a stunning red dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She looked like a movie star, like the kind of woman who could never do anything wrong, and I watched every man in the room notice her while their girlfriends pretended not to see their wandering eyes. "Melissa, this is so lovely," Jenny said, air-kissing my cheeks like we were old friends. "Thank you for including me. I know things have been complicated." "Not complicated at all," I replied with my sweetest smile. "Water under the bridge." For 2 hours, I played my part perfectly. I served drinks, made small talk, laughed at jokes, and watched Michael's face every time Jenny spoke. I watched him hang on her every word, watched him find excuses to sit near her, to touch her arm when he laughed, to look at her like she was the sun and everyone else was just reflecting her light. And then, just as I was serving the birthday cake, Michael's phone rang. "Detective Morrison," he answered, stepping away from the group. Everyone continued chatting, but I was close enough to hear his side of the conversation. "What? No, that's impossible. There must be some mistake." His voice was getting louder, more panicked. "I don't understand. Why would you need to see—" Yes, I'll come in tomorrow." He hung up and stood there for a moment, his face pale as paper. "Everything okay, buddy?" Jake called out. "Fine," Michael said quickly, but his eyes found Jenny across the room, and I saw something pass between them. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "Michael," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is there something wrong? You look upset." "No, it's nothing. Just work stuff." I tilted my head sympathetically. "Are you sure? Because that sounded like it was about the car accident, something about needing to see you." The room had gone quiet now, everyone's attention focused on Michael's obvious distress. "I said it's nothing, Melissa." His voice had an edge to it that made several people exchange glances. "Of course," I said smoothly. "I just worry about you, you know, especially after everything that happened, that terrible accident that could have killed you." Jenny spoke up for the first time since Michael's phone call. Maybe we should talk about something else. Oh, but it's such an interesting story, I continued, setting down the cake knife and moving to the center of the room. I mean, how often do brake lines just completely fail on a car that's been recently serviced? It's almost like it was meant to happen. Melissa, Michael warned, but there was desperation in his voice now. You know what I find most fascinating about the whole thing? I looked around the room at our captive audience. How Jenny managed to walk away from such a devastating crash with barely a scratch. It's almost miraculous, don't you think? Jenny's face had gone white. I think you've had too much wine. Have I? I laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that made people take a step back. Because I've been thinking about that night a lot lately, about how you followed Michael after causing a fight at our apartment, about how you convinced him to drive to Canyon Road. You remember, don't you, Michael? The place where we had our first kiss. Michael was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Melissa, stop. But I'm just getting started, I said, pulling out my phone, because I've learned so much over the past few months. Did you know, for instance, that security cameras are everywhere these days, even in old parking garages? I swiped to the video I'd saved and held up my phone so everyone could see the timestamp. 3 days before the accident, 2:47 a.m. This is Jenny, I announced cheerfully, in Michael's parking garage at almost 3 a.m, spending 20 minutes doing something very interesting to his brake lines. The room erupted. Someone gasped. Sarah from work said, "Oh my God," so loudly it echoed off the walls. Jake was staring at the phone screen like it was showing him footage of aliens landing. But I wasn't done. Not even close. And then there's this, I continued, pulling out printed copies of Jenny's text messages. Months of planning, surveillance, and my personal favourite, the life insurance policy she took out on Michael just weeks before the accident. $500,000, with Jenny as the beneficiary. I tossed the papers onto the coffee table like I was dealing cards. She was going to kill you, Michael. And if I hadn't donated my blood to save your worthless life, she would have collected $500,000 for murdering you. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael was staring at Jenny like he'd never seen her before, and she was backing toward the door like a cornered animal. This is insane, Jenny said, her voice shaking. She's obsessed with me. She's been harassing me for months. I'm what? I interrupted. The woman who saved the life of the man you tried to murder? The woman who figured out what you did while everyone else believed your perfect victim act? Michael finally found his voice. Jenny, is this true? And that's when Jenny Morrison, the woman he'd chosen over me time and time again, looked him straight in the eye and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. You were never supposed to survive, Michael. The plan was perfect until your stupid girlfriend showed up with her matching blood type. The confession hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Michael actually staggered backward, and I watched 3 years of his precious memories crumble in real time. You tried to kill me, he whispered. I tried to put you out of your misery, Jenny snapped, all pretense finally gone. You were pathetic, Michael. Weak and ordinary and settling for mediocrity with her. She pointed at me with venom. I was offering you a way out. By murdering him? Jake had found his voice and he sounded disgusted. By freeing him from a life that was beneath him, Jenny shot back. And it would have worked if Miss Perfect Girlfriend here hadn't played hero. I laughed then, really laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever made. You want to know the funny part, Jenny? Michael did choose you. Even after I saved his life, even after I bled for him, he chose you. He spent months pining for you, lying to me about seeing you, treating me like I was the consolation prize. So, in a way, you got exactly what you wanted. You just got it 6 months too late. I walked over to where my suitcases were waiting by the door. Yes, I'd packed before the party. The police will be here soon, I announced to the room. I called them before everyone arrived. That phone call Michael got, that was them asking him to come in for questioning about new evidence in his accident case. Jenny bolted for the door, but Jake and Tom blocked her way. "Oh, Jenny," I called sweetly. "One more thing. That backup plan you had, about framing me for attempted murder if your first plan failed. The police have those text messages too, along with the bank transfers, the insurance documents, and security footage from 3 different locations." She turned to look at me with pure hatred, and I gave her my brightest smile. "You picked the wrong woman to underestimate." As the sirens wailed in the distance, I picked up my bags and headed for the door. But first, I had one final gift for Michael. "For what it's worth," I said, looking at him one last time, "she's right about one thing. You're weak and pathetic, and you deserve each other. The only difference is she tried to murder you because she couldn't have you, and you murdered our relationship because you were too cowardly to choose. At least she had the guts to go after what she wanted." I paused at the door, looking back at the wreckage of his birthday party, his life, his perfect delusions. "Oh, and Michael, that blood I gave you? Consider it a loan, because after tonight you'll never have another drop of anything good from me again." 6 months later, I'm living in a new city with a new job and a new life that I built entirely for myself. Jenny Morrison is serving 25 years for attempted murder, insurance fraud, and a dozen other charges. Michael is alive, alone, and finally understanding the difference between love and obsession. And me? I'm finally free. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's walking away and watching the people who underestimated you destroy themselves with the truth you were kind enough to reveal. Because in the end, the most beautiful part wasn't watching their world fall apart. It was realizing that I never needed to be part of their world in the first place.